My mother looked me in the eye and said, "You've humiliated this family enough. Don't bother coming to your brother's campaign launch." That's the last thing she said to me before hanging up. 2 days later, I stood outside a grand auditorium in Washington, D.C., watching from the shadows as my family smiled for photographers. Red, white, and blue banners waved above the steps. Reporters shouted Jack's name. My brother, the Navy veteran turned state Senate candidate. Flashbulbs lit up the crowd like fireworks. I wasn't invited. Inside, speeches were being made. Donors applauded. My parents beamed in the front row. My name hadn't been spoken aloud in over a decade. At least, not with anything resembling pride. But I didn't flinch. I didn't protest. Instead, I walked up the side steps, passed through security, and slipped into the back row of the auditorium. Civilian clothes, no makeup, hair pinned back. I looked like a tired administrative assistant. That was the point. And then, someone stepped up to the podium and said my name. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge someone in the crowd. Dr. Samantha Wells, National Security Agency, one of the key minds behind the prevention of last year's cybergrid failure. Every head turned. Cameras swiveled. My father's hand dropped mid-applause. My mother's smile vanished. My brother stopped mid-sentence. They had no idea. Not a clue. And that moment, that was the beginning of everything shifting. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back to the beginning. When I first learned what it meant to be invisible in your own family, and what happens when the quiet one finally speaks. My name is Samantha Wells. I'm 38 years old. Most people know me as a quiet, average woman with a boring job and little ambition. That's the version my family sees, the version they believe. But the truth? I'm a senior cyber intelligence officer at the National Security Agency. I've led multi-agency response teams, stopped ransomware attacks that could have brought down Wall Street, and spent the past 15 years wearing a lie like a second skin. The lie. That I flunked out of graduate school. That I was caught plagiarizing during a critical project and had to leave under disgrace. None of that happened. What did happen is that during my second year at MIT, I was approached by an anonymous program linked to a federal initiative. My encryption research had caught their attention. They needed someone who could see patterns in digital chaos. Someone who could work in complete silence and disappear from the public eye. I said yes. The assignment came with a cover story, Academic Fraud. A clean, complete exit from academia. My records were sealed. My name scrubbed from publications. I vanished. And no one, not even my parents, was allowed to know the truth. That's how it works when you're absorbed into a black-level cybersecurity program operating at the edge of legality and necessity. I've worn many names since then, used a dozen identities, rerouted billion-dollar threats from hostile actors, recovered hostage data before hospitals lost power, prevented grid failures in 7 states. But back home, my mother told people I wasted her husband's military legacy, that I fell apart under pressure. My dad never said my name again. My brother Jack, he followed the path they loved. Naval Academy, Special Forces, now politics. He was the son they paraded at holiday parties, the one they framed in portraits. I was the shadow, the mistake. When people asked what I did for work, my mother would sigh and say, "Something to do with warehouses or logistics. We try not to talk about it." And I let her say it. For years, I let her say it. Because I believed in the work I was doing. Because national security came first. Because every person I protected was worth more than my pride. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Every family dinner, every toast where I was left out, every pointed silence, every false smile from cousins who pitied me. You start to wonder if you'll ever get to be seen for who you really are. And you start to wonder what it would look like, what it would feel like if the truth finally came out. I'll tell you this. It doesn't come out how you expect. It never does. But when it does, it burns down everything that tried to bury you. Before we continue, if you've ever been misjudged, if you've ever been treated like you're less than what you are, drop a comment. If you've ever hidden your strength just to protect people who wouldn't understand it, hit that like button. This is not a story about revenge. This is a story about power, about silence, about truth, and how sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one nobody saw coming. Let's begin. I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, in a house that practically bled red, white, and blue. Our backyard flag never touched the ground. Our front porch had seasonal wreaths that matched military holidays. My father, General Richard Wells, retired from the Army after 32 years of service. My mother, Margaret Wells, was president of a military spouse nonprofit and still ironed napkins for Sunday dinners. We weren't just a military family, we were a legacy. And in that world, discipline wasn't just expected, it was mandatory. My brother Jack and I were only 2 years apart, but you'd think we were from different planets. He was loud, physical, athletic, the kind of kid who wore camo to elementary school and saluted in photos. I was quiet. I asked questions. I read encryption manuals in middle school for fun, and took apart our router at 12 just to see if I could rebuild it better. My father called Jack a born leader. He called me a complication. When I got accepted into the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, you'd think it was good news. But instead of celebrating, my dad sighed. "It's not West Point," he muttered, "but I suppose it'll do." That was the first time I realized excellence wasn't enough unless it looked exactly like theirs. Still, I worked hard. I kept my head down. I wanted to make them proud in my own way. And for a while, I thought I was getting there. By the time I was 24, I was halfway through my doctoral research in applied cryptography. I was leading a team of grad students and running machine learning simulations on high-risk penetration systems. Then, one afternoon, 2 men in gray suits approached me outside campus. They knew my thesis. They knew I'd rewritten code used in early zero-day detection. They knew I'd solved an encryption problem that had stumped defense contractors for months. "We're with the agency," one of them said. "We have a project, high stakes, high clearance, but it comes with conditions. The conditions I would have to disappear. No publications. No academic record past year 2. My transcripts would show I left for personal misconduct, specifically academic fraud, a quick and quiet exit. It would protect me, and more importantly, it would protect the mission." I signed the papers that night. I didn't tell my parents. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I legally couldn't. A week later, I withdrew from MIT. By the end of the month, I had a new name in agency systems and was flown to a secure facility somewhere in New Mexico. They erased me from public databases like I'd never existed. To the outside world, I was a failure. And within weeks, my family made sure everyone knew it. The calls started slow. My mother left a message asking if I was okay. Then another one shorter, colder. Finally, silence. 6 weeks later, I got a letter from my father. 1 line, handwritten. "You embarrassed this family. Don't come home." No signature. I remember sitting in my tiny government-issued apartment, holding that letter, staring at the words like they were a foreign language. I had just stopped a financial cyber attack aimed at 2 major banks. And I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. It only got worse from there. My mother started telling people I had ethical issues. She never gave details, just enough implication to let imaginations run wild. My father refused to speak to me. He would send Christmas cards addressed to Jack, but never included me. 1 year, they accidentally mailed a photo collage of the family without me in it. I still have that picture, not out of sentiment, but as proof of what silence costs. Jack, for his part, didn't know what to do. He tried to stay neutral at first, But neutrality fades fast when you're the family favorite. As his career rose first the Navy, then public speaking, then political interest, he leaned into the story. The successful son and the sister who lost her way. He never corrected it. He never asked me directly. Instead, he started making comments in group chats like, "Sam, if you ever need a referral, I know some admin jobs opening up." I played along. "Oh, thanks," I'd reply, "but I'm pretty settled where I am." That where happened to be leading a cyber task force, monitoring foreign backdoor activity, targeting water systems across 3 states. I couldn't tell him that. I couldn't tell anyone. Because that was the job. That was the life I signed up for. But every time I showed up at a wedding, or birthday, or even a funeral, I felt it. The side eyes, the lowered voices, the pity smiles. Cousin Melanie, God bless her and her smug law degree, once said across a table, "You know, Sam, it's really brave of you to show your face after what happened." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I knew. To them, I was the disgrace. And to me, I was the firewall between this country and disaster. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from living 2 lives. One that protects, serves, prevents the worst things from happening. And one that is ridiculed, misunderstood, and dismissed by the people you used to love. That's what the setup looked like. That's the stage. A family that mourned me while I was still alive. A brother whose rise depended on my disappearance. And a truth so big, so classified, that it could never be spoken aloud. Not until the day it exploded out of the silence. And when it did, everything changed. By the time I turned 30, I had stopped hoping for understanding. My job was saving lives. My cover was disappointing my family. And I had grown used to both. There's a strange numbness that comes when you live behind a wall of lies, especially when the people on the other side are the ones who raised you. They think you've given up on them, but the truth is, they gave up on you first. Every interaction became a performance. I flew home for Jack's promotion ceremony. He'd just made lieutenant commander. There were flags, speeches, a military band. Dad wore his uniform. Mom wore pearls. And me, I wore the lie. Jack made a joke in his speech. My sister always said she'd outrank me someday. But I guess office cubicles don't have medals. Laughter. The whole room laughed. Even my father. I smiled. I clapped. And then I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the stall, and stared at my reflection until I could breathe again. That same week, I had received a private commendation for intercepting a cyber attack aimed at 2 government agencies. The potential damage would have reached into the hundreds of millions. But my name was never meant to be spoken. So I smiled, nodded, and went home with a plastic bag of leftover cookies while everyone else toasted to Jack. The years blurred after that. Each holiday became harder to endure. The conversations always circled back to him, to his latest mission, to his political aspirations, to his flawless trajectory. I became a shadow in every room I entered. One Christmas, I showed up late, fresh off a 2-day mission in a secure location I still can't name. I had bruises on my ribs and barely 4 hours of sleep. My carry-on still had classified gear I couldn't leave behind. As I walked through the door, I overheard my uncle say, "She never sticks to anything. That's why she failed out." My mother didn't correct him. She just changed the subject. At dinner, she looked across the table and asked, "So, how's the warehouse still pushing boxes?" I opened my mouth, closed it. Then I smiled and said, "Still pushing." My cousin Melanie, who had recently landed a partnership at her law firm, smirked and offered me a job in admin. "You'd be great with spreadsheets." I nodded. I didn't tell her I'd spent the week decoding metadata from a cybercrime syndicate in Southeast Asia. What was the point? They already believed their version of me. The fiction was easier than the truth. And then came the engagement. Jack had proposed to Allison, a Navy medical officer with a jawline sharp enough to cut steel and a LinkedIn page that looked like a recruiting poster. My parents went wild. My mom threw a brunch just to announce it. Dad printed engagement announcements on formal cardstock and mailed them to every relative we hadn't spoken to in years. I received a group text invitation to the engagement party. Not a phone call, not a conversation, just a line at the bottom that read, "Dress code cocktail attire. And please, no awkward stories." That last line, that was for me. The party was set for the Saturday after Thanksgiving. On Thanksgiving Day, while everyone else was carving turkey and passing mashed potatoes, I was holed up in a secure communications room, coordinating a real-time cyber defense response. There was an incoming threat targeting multiple hospital networks. We were 2 hours away from potential ICU shutdowns. I stayed on that mission for 36 straight hours. By the time we stabilized the breach, it was already Saturday night. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Still, I sent Jack a message. "Sorry I couldn't make it. Work emergency." He replied with a single sentence. "Figures. No question, no curiosity, just dismissal." My mother called the next morning. "You know how hurt he was," she snapped. "All eyes were on him, and you couldn't even show up for one night. It's always about you, Sam. Always." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because everything I wanted to say was buried under national security law. The irony. While my mother scolded me for ruining the party, I was being nominated internally for an Intelligence Star, an award most Americans will never even know exists. But no one clapped for me. No one asked about the work. No one even saw me. I started wondering if I was disappearing for the country, or just disappearing altogether. My mission's successes grew. So did the distance between me and the people I once loved. I stopped attending birthdays, stopped replying to family group chats, stopped trying. Every time I tried to stitch the relationship back together, they pulled it apart thread by thread. They liked their version of me small, quiet, sad. I didn't fit in their photos anymore. And honestly, I stopped wanting to. But just when I thought I could quietly fade from their world forever, the campaign happened. Jack announced he was running for state senate. And suddenly, the spotlight widened. He was being profiled, interviewed, celebrated, and every story painted the same picture. Jack Wells, military hero, brilliant strategist, from a proud patriotic family. His sister, one reporter noted vaguely, took a less traditional path. Less traditional. That's what they called 15 years of classified national security work. That's what they called burning out my life to protect theirs. I watched the interviews, read the headlines, stayed quiet. But something inside me cracked. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't just want silence. I wanted truth. Not revenge, not chaos. Just truth. Because the longer you let people write your story, the more pages they fill with lies. And the only way to stop them is to show up and turn the page yourself. There's always a moment. One moment where something small snaps. Quietly, but permanently. For me, it wasn't a headline or a holiday dinner. It was a video clip. Jack had just launched his official campaign. State Senate, District 12, big media push, flashy rollout, veteran, leader, family man. The video opened with shots of him in uniform, followed by clips of him shaking hands with veterans, then speaking at local schools. The music swelled. And then there it was. A family photo. My parents, Jack, Allison, his fiancée, even Melanie, somehow. But me, gone, cropped out like I never existed. And the caption, a proud military legacy. The Wells family has always served with honor. Always served. That was the phrase that did it. I had been on 13 foreign cyber missions, shut down ransomware before it hit emergency rooms, rebuilt collapsed defense protocols, delivered briefings to the Joint Chiefs. And here I was, erased with a single caption. I closed the laptop, just stared at the blank screen. Then I opened a folder on my secure drive marked with red, Access Level 4. My eyes scanned pages of declassified operation summaries with my name attached. Silent victories, missions buried in code, work that saved lives but would never make the news. That was the life I had built, and I was done letting them ignore it. I wasn't going to post online. I wasn't going to argue at dinner tables. That's not who I am. But I knew someone who could help. Someone who had once said, "If you ever get tired of hiding, I'll be there." His name was Director Harmon. We'd worked together on a critical breach 2 years earlier. At the time, he was Deputy Chief of Homeland Cyber Defense. He's since been promoted. Now he was speaking at Jack's campaign launch. A public appearance, major donors, local press, live stream on 3 platforms. I didn't ask for anything dramatic, just a single call. I told him I might attend the event, quietly. No announcement, no confrontation, just show up. His voice was calm on the line. "You ready for that?" I paused. "I think I need it." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. We hung up. Then I spent the next 48 hours preparing. Not for war, not for some elaborate takedown, but for visibility. For once, I was going to be seen not as a failure or a footnote, but as the woman I actually am. The first step was simple appearance. I pulled out the one civilian dress I owned that still fit like armor. Simple black, sharp collar, mid-length, respectable, but firm. No heels, just flats, quiet shoes. Hair tight, minimal makeup, clean face. Then the hard part: transport and entry. Campaign events like this aren't exactly open doors, especially when you're not on the guest list. So I used what I had. I'm still listed under a generic contractor title with the Department of Homeland Security, enough to access federal grounds, even local ones, with the right clearance. I filed a quiet access notice under personal attendance. Non-operational, no flags. I wasn't breaking in. I was walking in legally, quietly, intentionally. The day of the event was bright, cold, but clear. Downtown D-Keys buzzed with traffic and politics. I arrived 15 minutes late. Not by accident, by design. I didn't want front row seating. I didn't want to distract from the opening remarks. I wanted to be invisible, until I wasn't. As I passed through the metal detectors, one of the security agents scanned my badge and hesitated. "Military?" he asked. "Cyber Division," I said. He gave a nod. Didn't ask further. Most don't. I slipped into the auditorium just as Jack was thanking his volunteers. My parents were seated up front. My mother wore navy. My father wore the same tie he wore at Jack's commissioning. His back was straight, shoulders square. I found a seat near the back. No name tag, no fanfare. Just me, watching, waiting. Jack talked about duty, about sacrifice, about leadership and public trust. I counted the number of times he said the word honor. It was 6. Then came the introduction for the keynote speaker, Director Harmon of Homeland Cyber Defense. He walked up with the steady calm of a man who has seen everything and still sleeps at night. He began his speech technical, sharp, about threats and infrastructure and new technologies and civic protection. And then his tone shifted. He paused, looked out across the crowd. "I wasn't planning on saying this," he said, "but I just saw someone in the audience who I owe a very personal thank you to." He paused again. "In my line of work, you rarely get to publicly acknowledge the people who operate in the dark. But today, I'm breaking that rule." His eyes found mine. He nodded, once. "Samantha Wells, you saved over 200,000 lives last spring when you neutralized that malware targeting the power grid. And I will never forget that. The silence that followed was thick enough to slice. Every head turned. My father stared. My mother froze. Jack blinked. His hands dropped from the podium. His smile faltered. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I just looked straight ahead. Still, calm. And for the first time in over 15 years. They saw me. I didn't move. Not when the applause started. Not when people turned their heads in my direction. Not even when the live stream camera zoomed in to try to find me. I sat still, hands folded, eyes forward. Director Harmon continued his speech like nothing had happened, weaving my name into the context of national cybersecurity. But the room was no longer listening to his words. They were looking at me. It wasn't just the people in that auditorium. It was the viewers watching online, the donors in the front rows, and most importantly, my family. My father leaned over to my mother. I saw his lips move. She lied. She didn't answer. Jack stood frozen at the podium, fingers gripping the wood like it might collapse beneath him. His mouth parted slightly, like he was about to speak, but nothing came out. In a single sentence, Harmon had destroyed the story they had built around me. The one where I was the failure, the dropout, the ghost. Now, I wasn't just visible. I was known, credited, named. And it wasn't revenge. It was revelation. A truth they never saw coming. When the speech ended, there was an awkward shuffle of energy, a ripple of confusion and readjustment. Some people clapped. Others whispered. Everyone glanced. I stood up quietly and made my way to the exit. I didn't need to linger. The message had landed. There was nothing more to say. But halfway up the aisle, I heard a voice. Samantha. I turned. Jack was standing just off the stage, eyes locked on me. He walked toward me, slowly, hesitant, like I might disappear if he blinked too fast. He started, then stopped. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He tried again. You're NSA. I nodded. For how long? Since I left MIT. He looked like someone had punched the air out of his lungs. All those years, he said quietly. We thought? I know what you thought. He looked down, then back at me. Why didn't you tell us? I tilted my head. Would you have believed me? That landed harder than I expected. He didn't answer. Behind him, our parents approached. My mother looked pale. Her hands clutched her purse so tightly I thought the leather might rip. My father's face was unreadable, the expression of a man recalibrating everything he thought was true. When they stopped in front of me, no one spoke for a moment. Then my mother said it. You told us you cheated, that you were expelled. No, I replied calmly. I told you I had to leave. You filled in the rest. But the stories, she whispered. The silence. Why would you let us think? Because I had no choice. I said, a little sharper now. Because the clearance level I held meant I couldn't even tell my reflection the truth. Because every day, I woke up to protect people who would never know my name, including you. My father swallowed hard. That speech, he said, about the power grid, that was real. Very real. And that project in Eastern Europe last year, the one Harmon mentioned, also real. He took a breath. How high is your clearance? I looked him straight in the eye. Higher than yours ever was. That wasn't meant to wound. It was just a fact. He blinked, then looked away. And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just pride they had lost. It was the illusion of superiority. They had built a narrative where Jack was the soldier, the patriot, the protector, and I was the mistake. But now the roles had flipped, and they didn't know what to do with that. My mother finally spoke again. All those times we told people you were working in logistics. I nodded. It wasn't a lie, just incomplete. She let out a short laugh. Not joyful, just stunned. Jack looked at me again. That's why you missed the engagement party. Yes? You said it was work. It was, I replied. We were patching a breach that would have exposed the identities of undercover aid workers. 2 of them were nearly kidnapped. He stared at me like I was a stranger. And, in a way, I was. They had never met this version of me. They had never cared to look. Now, they couldn't look away. I turned to leave again, but my father reached out and touched my arm. Wait, he said, don't go. Not yet. Something in his voice had changed. No longer the stern bark of a general. It was quieter, raw, honest. I need a moment, he said, to process, to apologize. I paused. It wasn't everything I wanted to hear, but it was something. And for the first time, it felt real. We walked outside together, away from the noise and the stares. Jack followed, still silent. My mother trailed behind, her heels clicking like nervous metronomes. We stopped near the reflecting pool, and there, with the Capitol dome in the distance, my father said it. I was wrong. Not shouted, not defensive, just 3 words. And for him, that was a mountain moved. I judged you by absence, he continued, by silence, by what I thought I understood. I didn't ask. I didn't want to ask. Because it was easier to be disappointed than to admit I didn't know my daughter at all. My throat tightened, but I held it together. You didn't just serve, he said. You sacrificed. I still do. He nodded slowly. I see that now. There wasn't a hug, not yet. But the space between us had shifted. My mother spoke next, voice cracking just a little. I kept a photo of you from MIT in a drawer. I couldn't throw it away. Even when I thought you lied to us, I couldn't let go of that girl. That girl. They were finally seeing her again. But more importantly, they were seeing me now. Not the dropout. Not the disgrace. But the woman who stood in the background of their lives, quietly holding up the walls. In the days that followed, the story didn't go viral. No headlines. No breaking news. That's how the intelligence world works. But the people who mattered, they knew. My family couldn't stop replaying that moment. Not the one when Director Harmon said my name, but what came after the silence, the realization, the unraveling of a 15-year narrative. The version of me they'd built in their heads had cracked wide open, and it forced them to look at what had really happened. I didn't expect overnight forgiveness. I wasn't looking for that. But something changed after that event. My father called the next morning. Not a text, not an email, a phone call. He didn't ask what I'd been doing all these years. He didn't demand details. He just said one thing. You held the line, didn't you? I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Yes, I said. I did. He cleared his throat. We didn't know how much weight you were carrying. You didn't want to. He didn't argue. Still, he said, I'd like to know more. When you're ready to tell me. That was the beginning. A week later, I was invited to dinner at their home for the first time in almost 5 years. No big celebration. No speeches. Just the 4 of us, me, my parents, and Jack sitting at the same dining table where so many sideways glances and cold silences had once lived. This time, it was different. They didn't ask about missions or operations. They knew better. Instead, they asked what they were allowed to ask. What was your favorite assignment? What city did you like most? How did you get started? And for the first time, I could give them glimpses. I liked Berlin, I said. It felt like a chessboard. So many players, so many layers. Jack leaned in. Is that where you learned to read satellite intercepts? I smiled. That's classified. He laughed. Real, open, honest laughter. My mother brought out dessert, my favorite. Lemon pie. I hadn't told her that in years. But she remembered. And when we finished eating, my dad stood and raised his glass, not to Jack, not to Allison, not to the family name, but to me. To the one who kept us safe, he said quietly, even when we didn't deserve it. It wasn't a grand toast, but it didn't need to be. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's more powerful than any medal. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. They moved forward into something new. My mother started asking before she spoke. No more assumptions. No more underhanded comments. She even pulled down an old photo from the hallway one, where I'd been cropped out and replaced it with a new one I'd taken just months ago in uniform. It wasn't a public post, just a private frame. Quiet, but permanent. Jack and I slowly rebuilt our connection. He sent fewer one-liner texts, more thoughtful messages. How's work? How's your team? Are you sleeping enough? I knew he still felt guilt. But guilt wasn't the goal. The goal was respect, understanding, balance. And we were getting there. One afternoon, he invited me to speak to a small group of veterans he was mentoring as part of his campaign platform. They don't need to know what you did, he said, just who you are. So I went. And I talked not about the missions, but about the silence, about how hard it is to serve in secret, to carry the weight of national security while being treated like you failed. They listened. And when I finished, a man in the back raised his hand. How did you not give up? He asked. I looked at him. I did. I said, many times. But then I remembered why I started, and that kept me going. It wasn't a rehearsed answer. It was just true. And it stuck. I walked out of that room lighter than I'd felt in years. There's something about being seen, genuinely seen, that untangles years of pain in a single moment. But none of this would have happened if I hadn't shown up to that auditorium. If I hadn't let my name be spoken aloud. Truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, it just needs a quiet room and someone brave enough to stand in it. 6 months later, I stood in full dress uniform at my own promotion ceremony. Brigadier General? It didn't happen with fanfare. No press, no parade. But there were 3 people sitting in the family section, my father, my mother, and my brother. That moment, it wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was everything. When my name was called, I walked to the front, steady and calm. The stars were pinned to my shoulder with quiet precision. The citation was brief, as expected. Most of my accomplishments couldn't be read aloud. But my family didn't need the words. They understood now. They knew enough to fill the silence with pride instead of confusion. Afterward, my dad shook my hand the way military men do. Firm grip, eye contact. Then, to my surprise, he pulled me into a hug. "You've earned every star," he said, voice tight. My mom wiped her eyes. "We were wrong. And you were so much more than we ever gave you credit for." And Jack, he just smiled. "General Wells," he said with a grin, offering a mock salute. "Told you you'd outrank me one day." We laughed. Not because it was funny, but because laughter is sometimes the only way to hold back tears. That night, we had dinner together, not as fractured parts of a family, but as people trying to rebuild something real. Slowly, honestly. The truth doesn't fix everything, but it opens the door. And when people walk through it with you, even after all the years of misunderstanding, you learn something important. You were never the problem. They just didn't know how to see you. Until they did. For anyone listening right now, maybe you're holding back a part of yourself. Maybe you're living behind a story someone else wrote for you. Let me tell you this. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need permission to be extraordinary. Sometimes the most world-changing work happens in silence. Sometimes the strongest people wear invisibility like armor. And sometimes, the people who once misjudged you become the ones who admire you most. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you finally let yourself be seen. So if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or misrepresented, drop a comment. I want to hear your story. Hit that like button if you've ever fought battles no one saw and came out stronger for it. And remember, truth doesn't need volume. It just needs space. Thank you for listening. Until next time.